Welcome to another Crazy Stylist tutorial about how to draw the human body. If you look at the lines that we currently have, we've got our vertical black lines and our divisional horizontal lines, as well as some red lines indicating where some features are of the human body. Now we've got three lines. The first will be a frontal pose, the second will be a side pose, and the last line will be the pose from the back. Now, the divisional lines here on the red surfaces indicate where the bends are, middle points of the figure, and where the black lines are the proportional elements that we use as measurement guidelines of building the proportions of the body that you will see as the figure progresses. So starting off with our proportional drawing of the human body is starting off with some indicational lines on the face and where the facial features will be. And from there, we will look at the bend on the eyes, nose, mouth, and chin. From there, building towards the angles to shoulder and shoulder, shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, and hand. And you will see that the bends correlate on the horizontal black lines as we start to build up the arm from the bend of the elbow towards the forearm to the bend on the wrist towards the hand and the edges towards the red line of where the featural point is. From there we look at the muscles from the clavicle towards the other shoulder, building up from the arm on our right towards the bend, shoulder, forearm, towards the center line of where the chest is going to be, looking at the rib cage towards the center of the stomach, edges of the torso, looking at the bend towards the muscles on the inside to the navel, going down towards the pelvic area. Then we look at an angle from the leg of hip to knee on both legs, and what we will then do is look at again building up the angle from the knee, structuring of the knee towards the top part of the thigh, towards the hip. From there it builds around the form towards the angle of the other knee, volume across the thigh towards the hip, then angle towards the middle part of the leg where the calf muscle is, towards an angle, going down to the ankle bone and the angle of feet. Remember, always we draw hands and feet bigger than what they are, and a key indicational point to know where the big toes are is looking at an angle from knee to big toe. Now moving on to the drawing on the second angle, which is from the side, we look at drawing an angle from shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, and hand. Looking at the bends where they correlate to the pose we have in the beginning of the frontal pose. Looking at the size of the head and the center line and the features of where the face and eyes, nose, and mouth would be. Building up again from the elbow towards the shoulder. Looking at where the center line of the chest cuts through the arm. Looking at the volume of the forearm, volume of the body towards the back, bottom in relation to the angle of the wrist, moving towards the front of the pelvic area, moving around the volumes towards the top of the arm, completing some structural elements on the head, looking at proportional volumes, moving downward towards the angle of the leg, building up the knee and thigh again, up towards the bottom, down towards the calf, angle from knee to big toe, and building up the volume and size of the foot. Now, you can see the same proportional elements will relate to the angle we have of the back, building up the basic volume of the head, shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, shoulder to shoulder ratio in relation to shoulder and elbow correlates, as well as elbow and wrist in most instances. Again, we build up the volume from the bend of the arm around the shoulder towards the back muscles. On the back, we look at the center V muscle pulling down, moving around to the edges of the back towards the shoulder blades, around the pelvic area that correlates to the side and front view we've just drawn, building up the arm on the far side again around the elbow area towards the shoulder, looking at the back muscles. From there, looking at the size of the hands. Again, from the back, looking at the center lines towards the bottom, where they correlate in relation to the wrist and hand, angle towards the bend of the legs, down to the ankles and feet. Again, building up the legs from the bend of where the knees are. From behind, looking at the calf muscles, angle which is in the center line of the body to the legs, building up the volume to the pelvis and moving down to feet. Now, what is important here to remember is looking at the volumes we currently have. We are looking at the proportions, not the traditional sizing of head and how many heads fit in a body, but we're looking at from head towards where the neck is aligned to the shoulder down to the bend of the arm, from the bend of the arm to the bend of the wrist to just above the knee, from that volume just towards the center of that leg down to the feet. So the in-between parts are where the features are, and the center line where those features cut through. And you can see that where the chest cuts through the arm, where the center part of the navel cuts through the center part of the forearm, and the hand in relation to the thigh, as well as the knee. So looking at building up the actual body again is looking at the center line of the body and looking at where we want to place shoulder and shoulder, shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, and hands. Again, building up the center line and angles are of utmost importance, especially correlating the angles of, if you look at the center line of the arm, where it cuts through in relation towards where the chest is, from the wrist to the bend of the torso and the edge of the hand to the pelvic area. So again, building up the center line of the arm towards the volume of the chest, rib cage, around the volumes towards the center part of the torso where the navel is, edge of the body, moving across to the shoulder and the bend of the elbow. From the elbow, we move down towards the forearm and wrist and hand. From that point, we just basically conclude the structuring of the head, and from there, looking at an angle we want the leg to be at, building the knee around the thigh, looking at a foreshortening of that leg moving to the back, smaller volume of the foreleg but towards the foot. We look at an angle from knee to big toe, building the other leg as the same principle describes towards the foot. If a figure is on the back or lying flat, again the center line is of importance, looking at where the bends would be of where the features of the face, towards shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, and hand. Building the structuring on the head, looking towards the center lines and volumes around the chest. The angle correlates to the angle of the shoulders, moving around to the edge of the body towards the pelvic area, towards building the volume on the arm, around the elbow towards the hand. From there, we move down to the angle of the leg. From one knee to the other knee, we look at an angle where the legs correlate, and we build up the volumes again from the knee around the thigh towards the ankle bone, looking at the angle of the foot, and you can correlate that angle and size of the foot from that knee towards the big toes, building up the other adjacent leg from knee around the thigh. Another angle, looking at center line of the body again, and looking at the edges of shoulder and shoulder and shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, is looking at the different perspective of foreshortening in this instance, again on the back, but the head closest to us. What this would mean is moving down towards the torso and legs, the legs would look as though they become small in terms of volume. But it is the foreshortening that you need to take note of. Looking again at building the legs up from knee to thigh and angle of ankle to foot, you will see that the angle from one knee to the other and the foreshortening of that other leg becomes far smaller. Now, building up different angles and proportions here is, again, shoulder and shoulder, shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, looking at where the center line of the body is and the meeting point of the chest, stomach, and pelvic area. Again, building the volumes from the inside out, looking at where the volumes and contours are of the muscles, not necessarily knowing the anatomy, but looking at the volumes and tonal value that you see of a particular figure, because no figure is the same. Again, looking at our volumes and angles that correlate to one another, we build the figure up from the inside, volumes around the thigh towards the pelvic area, looking at the angle to ankle bone and feet. Next angle that we can look at is the seated pose. So here we have shoulder and shoulder, shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist, and the hands moving to the side. But again, what will happen here is our chest and stomach area correlates to the angle of the shoulders, but yet our torso is going to bone in slightly towards the left, where our volume of the arm on the far side is going to have a negative space towards the side, because now we build up the leg as the figure is seated and the leg bends in, so we can't see that foreshortening again. A next pose of the center line of the body where the stomach area is going to bend in a little bit more, having the face hidden by the hand in relation to angle from elbow to shoulder, that foreshortens on that area. We build the volumes of the chest again in relation to the center line and bend of the arm we've just built up. From the pelvic area, we build up the leg, structuring of the knee and the foot, and one knee in relation to the other knee. We build up the volumes towards the pelvic area. And if the torso is bent even more to the back, our center line in relation to shoulder and shoulder, shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist will relate towards the turn and bend of the chest. That is far more to the back as what we would normally have. But we build up our contours towards the pelvic area again in relation to the volumes of that torso, towards the bend of that leg, from the knee building out, how that one leg relates to the angle of the other, building up the volume on that knee towards the foot. Now, looking at the contours of the female figure is the same principle abides, but if we look at our center line and we turn the head in relation to the neck slightly off of the center line, we'll look at where the angle of the chest is towards the bend on the rib cage, center of the stomach, and pelvic area. So the breast on the left hand side and the right hand side is somewhat on a center pose, so the sides would be very close to one another. Looking at a volume to the edge of the chest on the far right, we build it around that volume of the rib cage towards the center of that stomach, around the hip, angle towards the leg, edge towards the far side of the body, leg to the far side. We look at an angle from the center of that arm on the inside to the bend of the elbow. From the bend of the elbow, it moves towards the head at the top and completing some part of the facial features. On the next pose, we look at shoulder and shoulder, angle from the inside to the arm pocket on the elbow side towards the top of the wrist. Again, moving the head slightly off of the center, building up center part from the arm pocket to elbow to the hand. We move downward from the neck towards the breast on the far side, which is slightly smaller in terms of volume that we see because the figure is turned in relation to the center line. We build the contour of the rib cage around to the far side of the stomach on the bend of the navel. Again, building up the contour on the shoulder, volume towards the bend on the elbow to the wrist and hand. Moving down towards some identification of the features of the face, just seeing how it relates in the turn of the center line of the face. We then move down to the body and the angle from hip to knee to ankle and one knee in relation to the other, building from center around the bottom to the ankle bone, around that calf volume towards the sides of the foot, and building up the knee on the far side towards the foot on the side, top and around the thigh. Looking at the back muscles over here is looking at shoulder and shoulder and then identifying where the features are of the back. Very difficult to identify the back muscles, but you need to go and look at how one muscle relates to the other. Nothing is separate, but it's as though you're an ant walking over the model, drawing the contour, seeing the edges of the muscle moving from one tonal value over the edge down to the bottom part of the back itself, where the pelvic girdle is, towards the edge of that body, where the leg is going to come in on the far left, looking at the bottom where the figure is seated, edge towards where the head will be at the top, and defining the back and arm edges to identify the back in relation to the leg separately. From here, if we were to build up some part of tonal value, very quickly you'll be able to see and follow the contour lines and identifiable areas of the muscle that we've just drawn. It is important that we go according to the muscles as we build up for identifications. Looking at the next pose of the female figure from shoulder and shoulder and torso is looking at the contour of the one breast in relation to the other, the one being slightly bigger in terms of perception towards the bend on the arm, around to the neck, towards the shoulder on the far left, to looking at the structure of the clavicle, to the center of the torso, around the rib cage on the far side, looking at the center towards the navel, pelvic area muscle to the edge, moving across the stomach, up to the rib cage, moving down to the leg, turn on that hip to the bottom edge of the leg. From there, looking at the back, center line to the turn of the back to the bottom, we have shoulder and shoulder, structure on that shoulder blade to the other, center line of that back muscle, adjacent to the edge of that back, volume moving across to the shoulder, down to the bottom. From the bottom, the volume moves around to the leg, structure on the inside, from the one center line to the other, our volumes relate. Tonal value, again, same density of pencil, just in more frequent faint lines. The quicker the lines, the far more fainter your line work. But again, the contours correlate to the actual structuring we've applied, so that nothing becomes flat on the model or on the figure that we're drawing, but we're constantly going according to the form. And that is why it is important to build up the figure in terms of volume and not outline, to assist the drawing as a whole.